Hello, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome to the second episode of the Intercultural Communication series. Our goal for this episode is to learn about the concept of culture and the concept of communication within the setting in which we are living right now, which is the globalization. And then later we will arrive at the concept of intercultural communication in its deeper sense. We're also going to talk about the concept of the barriers up to the communication. But first, let's go to the big question of what is culture? Is it the way we dress? Is it the way we build our homes? Is it the way that people in Saudi Arabia wear hijab versus the way some people in Indonesia wear hijab? Is it the way we say our final goodbye to the people we love? Is it with a kiss? Is it with a hug? So what do you think? Are these all cultures? And what do you think about the difference between Indonesians, Indians, and Chinese in general compared to the difference of the life in the Western countries like the United States, Australia, and England? These are all very relevant questions, and the reason why we should understand this is because understanding the difference in people's way of life and ways of thinking, it's very important, and we can be aware of that differences. We can be aware of it as not always being the wish of individuals, but it is shaped by the number of factors from the outside of the people themselves. And this awareness will make us more tolerant towards the differences, and later we can develop the effective intercultural understanding, which leads to the effective intercultural communication. So let's start here. Let's go to the top left. The reason why I showed the picture of what might look like the policeman there is to show that in some society the cultural and religious rules are intertwined into the social organizations of what is okay and what is not. Here we see the woman, and the man, which was probably somewhere around her, was told not to have a gathering if they are not married. I also showed here the chicken feet, food that is considered nasty in some parts of the world. I also showed the hand gesture that might be interpreted differently in different parts of the world. Also, the appreciation of arts in a culture, but maybe is considered a crime in other places. You can also see the hierarchy in a capitalistic society there, the tribal government, and the architectural wonder that is a cultural product. Now, these are all the elements of culture, elements that are visible and invisible. But before we go deeper into it, we first need to go to the definition of culture from UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, so that we can have a starting point for this one. So we see there, culture is the set of distinctive spiritual, material, intellectual, and emotional features of society or social group, and that it encompasses, in addition to art and literature, lifestyles, ways of living together, value systems, traditions, and beliefs. This definition suggests that there are two basic components of culture: ideas and symbols on the top one hand, and the artifacts or material objects on the other hand. The first type, called the non-material culture, which is also known as the symbolic culture. It includes the values, beliefs, symbols, and language that define the society. The second type, called the material culture, it includes all the society's physical objects, such as the tools and technology, the clothing, the eating utensils, the materials for food, the means of transportations can be also included there, the architecture. So these elements of culture will be discussed next in the more details. Okay, but I have to say this first before we go on, because there is a risk here. Anything that is shown here is to show the examples that exist in some cultures. There is no intention of selecting a certain race or certain groups. For example, here there is no intention of being ideological. For example, I use the male picture instead of a female, for example, does not mean that I am making a gender-based statement on something. It is just that, okay, this is the picture that I think appropriate for the explanation of the case that I'm presenting. Also, please be mindful that when I make a statement, remember that generalization is always needed. Yeah, we do generalize things, but please be mindful of exceptions. For example, if I make a generalization that Indonesians are collectivistic in nature, but maybe some Indonesians are not very collectivistic. For example, in some very urbanized area, you can find people who are very individualistic in their life, in their views, in their belief. So it is always useful to generalize, but please be mindful of exceptions. Alright, so let's go with the first and the second elements of culture. Yeah, let's see what's happening here. First, we have the social organization. Social organization is the way that people within a culture interact with each other, including the roles and responsibilities of individuals within families, communities, larger societies. Social organization can encompass a wide range of factors such as the social hierarchy, kinship structures, and political systems. Well, again, here we have an example of how a collective rule applies to the individual business of people. The collective rule of a society as represented by the officers there, or the regional police, or Pol PP in Indonesia, is being used to regulate the lives of the individuals as represented by the female individual there shown in the picture. Now, the meaning of privacy here is generally different in Indonesia from that of the Western countries. Second, we have the language or symbol. Language is a fundamental aspect of a culture, as it is the primary mean by which people communicate with each other. Language can also play a role in shaping how people perceive and understand the whole world around them, as well as their social and cultural identity. In this picture, the OK gesture, in which the thumb and index finger form a circle with other fingers extended, can have different meanings in different cultures. And here are some examples of how it might be different. Yep, it can have different meanings in different cultures. In Western cultures, such as in the United States and Canada, the OK gesture is generally seen as a sign of approval or agreement. But in some Latin American countries, such as Brazil and Argentina, the OK gesture can be seen as offensive, or vulgar, particularly when the gesture is made with the palm facing inward. So that would be like this. In some European countries, such as France and Germany, the OK gesture can be interpreted as meaning zero or worthless. It doesn't mean anything like zero, worthless. It's not valuable. In Japan, the OK gesture is sometimes used to signify money or coins, and it can be used as a gesture to indicate yes or I understand. So you see that the gesture can be the elements of culture, and it is interpreted differently in many parts of the world. And we have the third here, the traditions and the religions. But the third tradition, it's synonymous with the word customs. And customs are the traditional practices and behaviors that are passed down through generation and help to define the culture. Customs here can include everything from food, dress, music, dance, and often reflect the values and beliefs of the society. For example, in Sasak culture in Indonesia, we eat every part of a chicken, like the feet of a chicken. The reason why we do this can be because we believe that we should not waste any good parts of something that can be eaten. And I've tasted chicken feet and other parts of chickens, and they're so delicious. Sorry. Or because we don't know that probably we eat it because we don't know that the internal organs of chicken are not good for our health. So here we have the problem of knowledge, yeah? But what do you think? What do you think? Why do you think we eat the internal parts of a chicken? But we also have religions here. Religion, but this is problematic. Not many people will agree that religion is a part of culture because it will indicate that it is a creation of humans, right? But for the sake of the argument, here we're not talking about the transcendental or the ontological element of religion, but the religious practices and the products of it. We can talk about that as a product of culture. We see religion here as just another important element of a culture, really, really important, as it shapes the way people view the world and their place, like the place of human in the world. Religious beliefs and practices can influence everything from personal behavior to social and political structures. And it can also provide a sense of community. So you see people, religious people are proven by research that they are more collectivistic in nature and they have a stronger bonds. And it shapes the identity of the individuals within a bigger culture. We have arts and literature. They are the fundamental aspects of culture as they express the values, beliefs, and ideas of society through various forms of arts, such as music, dance, theater, literature, and visual arts. The arts and literature of a culture can also help to define its identity and shape the way people perceive the world around them. Let me ask a question here. If we compare Bali and Lombok in Indonesia, there are differences in the qualities of arts that they produce, not the qualities, but also the quantities of their statues, for example. I think we have to talk about the difference in the quantities and the qualities because, why don't we have lots of statues and beautiful art forms in the forms of statues? Why do you think in Indonesia we don't have statues like David here, the masterpiece of Michelangelo? I think there is a reason for that, and it is an open question, so write in the comment probably why. And then we also have the government form here. The form of the governments can refer to the political system and how power is distributed within a society. And this can range from democratic system and authoritarian system, hierarchical system, the traditional, the modern, tribal forms of government, for example, can also be included there. This can have a significant impact on how people distribute power, whether we will have the right to vote, for example. In some countries like Saudi Arabia, the right to vote does not go to the individuals, right? You don't have the right for individual voting. But in a more democratic society, people can freely criticize the government in many more ways compared to the ones in an authoritarian government, for example. In some countries, you can make funny caricature of a president and still be okay, you will still be alive. But in certain countries, you cannot create those same funny cartoons of a president because they have they put a different level of power upon individuals. And this is the last, the economic system. So we have the difference of the economic systems in the world. Economic system will refer to the ways in which resources are allocated, goods and services that produce and distributed, and the wealth that is generated within a society. Now, different economic systems such as capitalism, socialism, and traditional economies, for example, can have significant impact on the way that people live and work within a society and how they exchange goods and services. For example, capitalism and socialism represented two different economic systems, each with its own set of cultural values. In capitalism, for example, it values individualism in a way that the focus is individual achievement, entrepreneurship, and self-reliance on individuals. It also values competition as something that is positive. It values materialism. It's not in a way that it is always bad to be tied to something material, but it means that the accumulation of wealth and possessions is often seen as measure of success, and it also a measure of discipline, and also a measure of hard work. Innovation, it's also valued highly in free market, for sure, that you have to be able to have some level of freedom to regulate the price of something and how you want to make a profit out of it, and how do we maximize the distribution of the resources in a society. But we see in socialism, they value collectivism, cooperation, equality, and public ownership. These do not mean that some are better than the others. We can talk about that in the details. But it just means that people have different philosophies in the way that the resources are allocated. Yeah, and it is very important to note that these cultural values are not mutually exclusive. We can find many cultures that incorporate both elements from the capitalism and socialism. And now we hear terms like social democrat, that you have a very strong element of the capitalistic society, but also you also value the public welfare. So it's a social democrat there. And we also hear the word economy Pancasila, for example, in Indonesia. That is also, we see it as the element of culture in terms of the economy. Okay, this is something that is always exist. It's always present in all explanations about culture and cultural differences. This is the famous cultural iceberg. And it is a metaphor used to explain the idea that there are both visible on top and hidden cultural elements under the sea that shape how people think, behave, and communicate. Just like an iceberg, we have the invisible part above the water, and a larger unseen part is always below the surface. It's always bigger under the sea, something that we don't see. The visual components there is like the dress, arts, the language, the architecture, the food, the music, and etiquettes will mean how you behave in a certain context, like etiquettes of eating, for example. And then we have the clothing. In Indonesia, for example, we have kebaya. And also now people wear hijab more than people wear it in the 90s, for example. In Japan, we have kimono, maybe not always wearing kimono, but we have in India people wearing sari, and these are all the invisible parts. The food, how it's prepared, it's visible. And also we have the music. We can see the music, but we see the music performance and also the instruments there, and the arts are also visible. Now, this arts, it's very interesting because it can really gives the window into what kind of mythology, history, and beliefs that are present in culture. But what is behind hijab? What is the philosophy behind people wearing hijab? Something that is visible. So what is invisible about it? What is invisible about something visible that is food, for example? Why do we eat together? The act of eating together is visible, but the philosophy behind it is not always visible. And we believe that there is a component that is under the sea here, under the surface, is the values, traditions, beliefs, philosophy, ethics, customs, morals, and the meanings of life. For example, beliefs. Yeah, a culture's belief can shape how people view the world and make decisions. Some cultures place a strong emphasis on individualism, while others prioritize collectivism. Maybe the reason why we eat together in a large group is because we respect the collectivistic spirits of the society, or maybe is because we don't have enough to eat and we have to share. Now think about this one, which one is the philosophical and probably economical reason on why we eat together. The values as well, we have the values of honesty, respect, and family loyalty. So we have difference in the way we build our homes. For example, some people build their homes so that it can accommodate many people in the home. We have the difference in attitudes. Attitudes is something that is not visible, but it is visible in the way we bow to the elders. For example, if we pass some elderly groups or some elderly person, we just bow a little in Indonesia. It shows that we respect the elders in that kind of way. But it doesn't mean that people who don't bow to their elders, it doesn't mean that they disrespect their elders, but because they have different ways of respecting their elders. So what is visible? The way we bow. But what is not visible is the philosophy behind bowing. The ethics also, we have to talk about the ethics, because this is the moral philosophy. Some society might have different moral philosophy, in a way that who decides wrong or right? Do you get the wrong or right from a book, like a holy book? In Islam, the source of right or wrong will be from the Quran. But in some other societies, they don't use the holy books to decide what is wrong or what is right. So overall, the cultural iceberg really helps to illustrate the idea that culture is very complex and multifaceted, with both the visible and invisible components that influence how people interact with each other. And by understanding the hidden underlying cultural elements that shape behavior, we can develop a greater appreciation and respect for cultural differences. Always remember the cultural iceberg. And then we have the communication. Like culture, it also has the elements or notions that form or construct a communication act. So we have the source, message, channel, receiver, and feedback, environment, context, and interference. If you see here from the picture, the source is the person. Yeah. Do you remember this event? I remember this one. Puan Maharani giving a remark in a forum, Parliamentary Union General Assembly in Madrid in Spain. So the source here is the person. So Puan Maharani is the source of the message, and the message is the information or content that is transmitted to the receiver. Yeah. In this picture, she was delivering a speech about proliferation of fake news in the light of COVID action of Indonesia. And the channel here is the medium, the verbal. I think she was delivering the verbal medium. And also the receiver is the audience, and the feedback, the audience gives some feedback in a way that probably they will clap, they will appreciate, they give the attention. Some people play with their phones. They react differently. And also the environment here is the physical, social, and cultural context. Yeah. For example, we can guess here if people are all listening, or maybe they are talking to each other, depending on the power of Puan, the power that Puan has over the individuals in the group there. And the context here will be the specific situation or circumstance of the communication. For example, if Xi Jinping is speaking in front of the members of Communist Party in China, for example, people will act differently, depending on whether the Xi Jinping was delivering a humor or delivering a very important part of their teaching in the Communist Party, for example. And lastly, the interference here is any factors that might distort or disrupt the communication process. It can be personal inability of a person to speak. I think we know here in this example, Puan Maharani found it difficult to pronounce the word proliferation. And I think she repeated up until like 5 times the word proliferate, like that. So that was interference, which is very normal. People made a big deal about it on Twitter. But this is not a big deal because it happens often. But yeah, Puan Maharani could have practiced probably more on that, some difficult words. And we have the challenges in communication, for sure. We have the challenges in the language, the communication style differences, the stereotypes and prejudices, nonverbal communication, and the power dynamic. We will talk about this in the following slides. First, we have the problem of language proficiency here. Yeah, individuals sometimes cannot effectively communicate with each other due to the differences in the proficiency that they have in the language, and it is very simple. A tourist and a waiter in a restaurant can have misunderstanding on what is ordered because they have limited, for example, the tourist cannot speak the local language, and the local guy in warung or just a food stall, for example, cannot understand what is being ordered. And they can be frustrating, and it can feel uncomfortable in the situation. And these pictures, for example, solving means buying your children's ovation. I always question whether these pictures are true or not, but they are entertaining. And if they are true, is it possible that they were doing this on purpose? Because if they are true, it will be very hard to be understood. Yeah, so it's also a problem of communication. It's a barrier to the communication. Another example of the cultural differences that might hinder the communication is the differences in the communication style. You hear about this, and I hope we can be a little bit critical here about the statement. Is it true that in some cultures communication can be more direct and explicit, while in others they more indirect and implicit? I think Western are direct and Indonesians are indirect. So you have to be critical. We have to be critical about this one. Western people use concise language, for example. Say what you mean and mean what you say. This is their principle. In some Asian cultures, communication can be indirect and implicit, with people relying on nonverbal cues and subtle hints to convey their message. But does it mean that the direct is better than the indirect one? I mean, does it mean like that? Is being direct always better than being indirect? So that's an open question. But the miscommunication that might happen here is because someone from a Western culture might interpret the indirect communication of somebody from the Western culture as being unclear or unassertive, while some Asian cultures may perceive the direct communication style of someone from the West as being too rude or confrontational. So we have to be considerate about this, and it can be a barrier to the communication. All right, and this one is a big challenge, and we do this all the time. We have all kinds of stereotypes. Stereotypes here are generalization or assumptions that are made about a group of people based on their race, ethnicity, gender, religion, sexual orientation, and other characteristics. Some stereotypes, for example, Asians are good at math, or women are emotional and irrational. Men are more interested in objects, for example, and women are more interested in makeups. I know that if we see the average here, we can debate about this, but making stereotypes about women being emotional and irrational is really, really risky in terms of the communication. We also hear stereotypes involving Muslims, like Muslims are radicals. It's the stereotype that persists in many parts of the world. Or women in Islam is close-minded. This is beyond stereotypes, and it can be very dangerous, and it can be an insult, and it can be a sign of intolerance. We can also hear stereotypes like Indonesians are always late. Well, okay, is it stereotype? Well, probably it is true. Yep, you decide. Latinos are all illegal immigrants, and people with disabilities are helpless and independent. Older people are technologically illiterate. Well, these are all the stereotypes that are risky. Now, what do you think about all this? Why might they cause some problems in the communication? Well, if we believe this to be true, there will be tensions in the communication because we're attacking some groups of people with negative emotion or assumptions. So it is important to recognize that if you hear something about a group, do not make assumptions. Always interact individual to individual, and it will be very, very useful that we can have this kind of conceptual tool in our head. And it's clearly true that stereotypes and prejudice can be the barriers of the communication. And the power dynamic, it can create significant barriers to the effective cultural communication. It refers to the way which power is distributed between individuals or group, and it will, like, the factors will be the race, ethnicity, the social status, how much money you have, or what political position you're having, and the educational level as well, and also the how you speak the languages also can be seen as a form of the power dynamic there. Imagine a situation where you speak about your expertise with somebody who speaks native English. Let's say the topic there is the politics, and you're speaking Indonesian English, and your partner is speaking native English. Probably you have better knowledge about it, but because he has the dominance over the native proficiency in the speaking, you might feel inferior because if one person in a conversation speaks fluent and the other does not, the power there might favor the English speaker, making it difficult for the less fluent one to express their idea. So it is important for those who speak native English to try to accommodate the ability of others who don't speak English as good as the native. And it has to be done in a way that it doesn't close the doors of the learning potential. So the way of speaking does not have to be dumped down on the speed, for example, or the choice of words. So the theory of accommodation, if I'm not mistaken, in the sociolinguistic sense. Another example of power dynamic is in the organization. In organization, for example, power dynamic can also create barrier to the communication. If one group of people holds more power of authority than the rest, it will be difficult for the others to have their say on something, and then the communication it does not happen. So that's why if the boss is very authoritarian in a way that it doesn't listen to the people working for him or working with him, I think there has to be something in a way that their health in working will not be maximized. The staff will find it hard to communicate ideas, even though they know that their ideas and opinions are better and brighter than the bosses. It is very, very possible that it might happen, but because of the power dynamic in the organization, it can create the barrier of the communication. And the last in our list of the barriers to the communication is the non-verbal communication, and I think this will be very interesting. Non-verbal communication, the body language and the facial expression, it can hinder the communication in a way that it can be misinterpreted or misunderstood. Eye contact, for example, in some cultures, maintaining eye contact during a conversation is a sign of respect or engagement. But in other cultures, avoiding eye contact is a sign of respect. And direct eye contact might be seen as something that is rude or aggressive. Now, imagine a situation. Your mother and father are mad at you. And my question is, do you look into their eyes when they're mad? And if not, why? Okay. The gesture as well. Gesture, we'll talk about the okay sign or your loser sign. Thumbs up also can have different meanings in different culture. Or the use of right hand when handing something or handling something. Right hand and the left hand. I remember being somebody who was raised in Indonesia in Lombok. Starting from the very early years, we learn about the concept of right and left and right and wrong, and then that the right hand is the right hand. Yeah, the right hand is right hand, and the wrong hand is the left. Maybe it's different. I always feel uneasy when somebody hands me something with the left hand. Posture can also communicate something. If you slouch, if you are too relaxed in a meeting, maybe it can mean laziness in some cultures. But in other cultures, it's not laziness. It's just you're just being relaxed and being informal. So I don't know. What do you think about this one? And I think it will be based on the context, and opinions are welcome. Facial expressions here, it can be like smiles can be interpreted differently. Maybe it's a sign of shyness. It's a sign of politeness. Yeah. So the main point here is that the nonverbal communication sometimes can be misunderstood and misinterpreted. It is important there is to be aware of the meaning of one nonverbal communication cue, so that we can have the best communication possible. So for the next meeting, we will learn more about this one, especially related to the individual and the collectivistic culture. So I think this is the end of the introduction series to the lecture. We talked about the concept of culture, we talked about the concept of communication, the elements of it, and also the barriers to the communication. And you can hear it from my voice that I think I'm running out of my voice. And yep, see you. Or does this mean a different way in different cultures? I think no. I think this means bye-bye. All right, bye-bye. Thank you very much for listening.